Call the meeting to order. All right, let's call the meeting to order at 6:03. Sorry, we were just waiting for a quorum to make sure we had folks, so.
While we were eating our fajita.
Yeah, well, we were eating a great fajita dinner from Vallarta, so I'll be online just a good meal. So let's do the introduction of members and audience. Kristen, you want to call the roll?
Yes. Sonia Macy's. Miranda Kowchuk. Here. Doug Overton. Ken Brenner.
Yes.
Oh. Julie Baxter.
Here.
Stephen Meyer.
Here.
Andy Rossi. Mike Camblin.
Here.
Sean Welder.
Here.
Jay Sheehan. Alden Vandenbrink. He's online.
Here,
Seven.
I'm here. Yes, we are having some internet issues in Rangeley today with Verizon.
Casey Green. Rebecca Breezemore, here. Callie Scritchfield. Tim Sullivan.
Here.
Will Myers.
Present.
Kent Beatrice. Frank Alphone.
Here.
Jackie Brown.
Here.
Jeff Myers.
Here.
Doug Monger.
Here.
Jeff Comstock.
Yes, I'm here.
Doug Davis.
Present.
Charles Whiteman.
Here.
Chris Collins.
Chris Collins.
Chris Collins, yeah.
I don't see Chris on.
Jennifer Holloway.
I don't see Jennifer either.
Travis Day. Bill Badaraka.
He said he would not be here.
Vince Wilczek. T-Rex Dickinson. Patrick Eamon O'Toole. And Jonathan Bowler. Y'all. All right. We have 17.
He's fine with the quorum. All right. So I was going to appoint a new member, but he's not online and not in the room. So let's table that for right now, and if he joins, we'll come back to it, and if not, we will do the honors next time. Yeah, I kind of thought he was going to be here with it. Okay. And I forgot the agenda item to review and approve the agenda one more time. Does anybody have any, after looking at the agenda, does anybody have any see any issues with the agenda or needs to move an item, add an item.
And we've heard back from Jennifer Bach.
We've not. The last I heard was she was going to be here in person.
Motion to approve the agenda as it exists.
Second, Brenner.
A motion by Myers, second by Brenner. Any other further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the agenda as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay. Anyone opposed to the approval of the agenda, please say nay. Okay, hearing down, the ayes have it. So our first order of business is to review and approve the November 13th, 2024 minutes. Has everybody had a chance to look at those?
I'll vote. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the November 13th, 2024 Basin Roundtable meeting.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Chuck Whiteman, second.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Okay, I have a motion in a second. Any comments on the meeting minutes for further discussion? So, hearing none. All in favor of accepting the minutes as written, please say aye.
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 Okay, anyone in favor of not accepting the minutes as written, please say nay. Okay, the ayes have it, minutes are passed. Public comment for items not on agenda. So 3 minutes per individual and 5 minutes.
Erin's got her hand up.
Oh,
Yeah,
Erin.
did you, hi, Steve, and I'll tell everybody I was the one that informed Steve that I didn't need to be put on tonight's agenda, but a couple things came to my mind that I wanted to mention, so I'll take my 3 minutes during this opportunity. I just want to remind everybody that the first deadline for the measurement rules is coming up. It's January 16th. And right now, if people are aware of individuals that know they're not in compliance with their January 16th deadline, if that is their deadline, I really encourage them to file extensions of time. If we are aware of structures that are not in compliance and they have not filed an extension of time or even requested that their structure be recognized as inactive, I likely am going to start issuing orders this spring, and which is definitely not my preferred option. I would rather give people the opportunity to come into compliance with the rules. So again, get out that word to your constituents, and if you have friends or neighbors that need to come into compliance, encourage them to do that. I don't remember if I mentioned this at the last meeting, but I have submitted my report to Jason Ullman requesting that the White River be designated over appropriated, and that would be upstream of the Taylor Draw Power Conduit. Jason and I have discussed this over appropriation. I think the over appropriation request, I should say, and I do think it's likely he will designate the basin over appropriated. But before doing so, we are going to hold a public meeting in Meeker. Initially, we're going to hold it on February 12th, but I think that's going to be moved up to February 5th. Keep my fingers crossed. So there'd be a meeting coming up really soon to just educate the people in the basin what it means for them for a basin to become over appropriated. And for all those in the room there that are in the Yampa River Basin, you know all about it and are familiar with it. But we still think it's very important to educate the people in White River. So Steve, I just wanted to mention those two things.
okay, Erin, will there be a Zoom option for that over appropriation meeting on the 5th?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Will there be a Zoom option to?
We,
to attend that meeting?
we hadn't planned on it, but if the room is, if the facility that we choose allows for that, and we can actually do it in a way that, you know, sometimes hybrid meetings are difficult, but if we can do it in a reasonable way and have it successful, we definitely will consider that.
Okay, I was just wondering, we're gonna put that on our, we'll have it, Sally, put that on our website, if there's a Zoom link, if you guys decide there will be, just maybe you can
Okay.
share it with Sally and we can post it on our website.
Absolutely, I'll do that.
Thanks, Bill Stiggs.
Okay, thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
Okay, Will Myers, did you have a comment you want to make?
Yeah, Steve, I just wanted to give everyone a quick update on the Dressler Dam, which is a jurisdictional reservoir that's just located east of Craig out here. We put in for 2 grants. I think the first grant was several years ago for like some spillway improvements. And the design has since been completed last fall, and it's been approved by Dam Safety Division, and basically it entails a new outlet pipe and some erosion riprap on the dam face and a few other things. We also have a grant that's for construction of those. What we're trying to do right now is get some more recent bids to complete those improvements and make sure we have enough funds available to get it all completed this year, but we're trying to get that going this year, and hopefully we have enough funds. If not, we might come back around and get some more, but that's where we're at. We closed the one out and ready to start work on the other one, hopefully this spring.
Okay. All right, thanks, Will. Anybody else have public comment? Anybody online have public comment? Not seeing any. So let me take advantage of public comment and talk off topic a little bit. As you know, one of our big goals is to not only maintain the acreage, the farmed ranch, the farmed acreage that we have in the Yampa White Green, but to try to increase that. And I don't know if you all know, but I'm on this board, I'm on the Moffett County Land Use Board, and I'm on the Colorado First Conservation Board. And the other 2 boards that I'm on have been dealing with solar and potentially wind farms. And those, so those things are coming under review, under permit. So they're looking for conditional use permits. And I just want to mention that to this point in Moffett County, those areas that have been purchased up, the right spot to develop. But right now it's just been solar, but there is some interest in wind. Those are basically taking farmed land out of farming to build these solar panels. So there's a big farm going down in at near Colorado.
That isn't really irrigated land, that's.
That's irrigated, it's not irrigated, yeah, well, part of Colorado's was irrigated.
Oh, nice, okay.
Yeah. But we've had some interest at the Colorado First Conservation District from some wind farm folks, and they have shown interest in being essentially in the fields. Like, nobody wants to build in the sagebrush, they all want to build in the fields. So I don't know what we could do about it. I'm just saying.
Do they prohibit production agriculture in most wind farm area? You can't farm that.
Well, Moffett County and our conservation district are trying to change that to where they would keep at least some of that farmed. I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention that with these 2 power plants going out and 3 or 4 coal mines, if, however you want to count them. People are looking at Northwest Colorado as needing potentially more power.
Yeah.
And the places that the companies are looking are in flat, cleared areas, which are fields, pastures. So, they may or may not be irrigated. But, a lot of them are. So I just bring that to, I guess this group's attention is that we are potentially losing acreage to renewable energy. And it's all of the development is on private lands. So private landowners are gonna do what private landowners do. They make their own decisions for whatever is best for them. So I'm just bringing it to this board's attention that we're losing ground on that particular bid goal.
Is there any language in your land use documents, master plan for Moffett County that addresses this topic?
Yes, so there's Colorado First Conservation District has asked for a conservation plan to be filed for this conditional use permit that Moffett County Planning and Zoning will issue. And Moffett County has, so we have, our conservation board has like 7 bullet points for things that we'd like to see in writing about the conservation, how they're gonna maintain the conservation values of the land. Moffett County has another 6 or 8, probably more than that, of items that they would like to see addressed. They, they're a different set.
So it's a proposal. It's a long ways from an approval.
Well, they're gonna put all of this would be on the conditional use permit. They'll have it as stipulations for gaining that permit. Will be to have all of these things.
What is the timeline?
There's several going through right now. I think
this summer.
potentially, so that the biggest thing is they've got to sell all these people that are in here presenting these projects have to sell the power to a tri-state or a YDE or whatever. And Moffett County's not gonna issue the permit until that's sold. So I think late summer is likely when tri-state or whoever will be making decisions on how they're gonna move forward. But I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention that we're potentially losing some ground and against one of our white green implementation plans.
Is Tri-State one of the applicants on this, any of these projects?
No, not at this. So Tri-State is on board with the one in Colorado. Okay, that's already been approved.
Wait, it's
years ago. Okay, yeah, so the solar plan that they're doing now, but these new ones that are coming in will have. And that one got biased, to be honest. I didn't even hear about it until I started building it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so,
It's huge, too.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's huge. Oh my gosh.
but anyway, there are companies here that are trying to develop wind and solar. Basically because of the tax breaks that they get, and they look at these power plants closing down, and they've got supply lines to get power out of here. Huge, yeah, so, anyway, my 3 minutes are up. Thanks for that, that's all. Okay, so, anybody else have public comment that they'd like to add?
This is Jackie. I guess I just feel like I should chime in. That's not totally accurate about transmission lines. And so I just don't want to give the impression that there is excess availability on those lines. Those are WAPA lines, and there is a waiting list to be on for wheeling through WAPA. And so I think it's a misnomer that people think because the plants are coming offline that there's going to be open and excess transmission available. That's not the case, across the board, I would say. So just wanted to correct that. And if there's any questions about any of the projects that Tri-State's working on, I'm happy to get those answers. Those aren't my projects, obviously. But, rather than, if there's any questions or anything about the work that we do, happy to get answers for those.
Yeah, so Rich Thompson is still on our Moffett County Land Use Board, and he tries to set people straight on they just because the power plants are closing doesn't necessarily mean there's availability. But I've been to meetings where folks have the people that are coming in and buying the leases and trying to sell the projects. Well, that's their belief, is that there's transmission to be had. Which in most cases is wrong. So thanks, Jackie.
Sure.
Jeff. Okay, is Jeff on?
Steve, we skipped a step here because we had roll call, but we didn't really have any guests. Just themselves, do we want to do that? Or?
Oh, yeah. That's good. We should do that.
I'm so sorry.
Did we send around the list?
I have not seen you get one of those done.
Okay.
Jeff is on when the time comes.
Okay.
I'm just start with Thomas.
Thomas Kennedy, Tri-State Generation Transmission. I have exactly no responsibilities since Jackie's here, but. Hi, Scott Cowman, I'm the Director of Environmental Health for Rupp County, and sitting in for Sonny Macy's tonight.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, good, Scott.
So you got to mark Sonia as president.
Sorry for being late. I made every wrong turn I could have. Try to get in this building.
You got lost in Craig, that's
Just here at the college.
Oh, here you go.
It'll be easier next time.
And I think, rather than call on people online, Kristen, maybe just write their name down as you scan through the rest. Okay, so CWCB update, budget report and statewide fund update. Yeah.
Yep, thanks. So yeah, just a few kind of general updates for you all. I'll start with what we're all here for, most important, WSRF update. So the WSRF statewide grant fund balance is low. Well, we're anticipating that if everything gets approved by the CWCB board at the January and March meetings, that the statewide balance will be zero or fully awarded. And so, since 2022, and that special infusion that we got to the WSRF program, we've been operating under what's called a special funding procedure, which allowed us to reinstitute the statewide balance for the time being. And since all of those funds will be awarded, if everything gets approved, we'll return to kind of the standard operating procedures, which is, we've really been operating in a bit of a hybrid. That chunk of money that we got in 2022 was a lot and took a lot to kind of spend down. We're just now getting to that point. So, that stood, and then so we'll just return to the standard, annual allocation of 300,000 in the fall. And so the statewide account will go back to being a reserve for that annual allocation. We're anticipating still holding 3 years worth of annual allocation in there, just in case severance tax takes a deep dive, like we've seen in the past. But so I just wanted you all to be aware of that, as you get project proponents coming, talking about WSRF. Ashley, I think, is in the room. All the regional grant managers are aware of this and have been, letting folks know. But anything submitted to the CWCB starting February 1st at that next WSRF deadline will only be able to apply for basin funds for the time being. I also wanted to provide a little update on the CWCB guide. We've finished it. It's been through the internal kind of review and approval processes. So we're working on getting the final copy of that up on the Engage CWCB page. Probably by the board meeting in Water Congress, it'll be up there. We're also going to have some printed copies available too. So if you are interested in that, just let me know and I can make sure to bring a few to the next roundtable meeting that I can make in person. Hopefully that'll be the March meeting. Frank, I see you got a question. Do you want me to keep going or do you want me to pause for a second and take some questions?
Maybe pause, Jeff,
Okay.
because my question is related to the WSRF grant funding.
Sure.
Just maybe a point of clarification. Our Basin Roundtable approved, of course, some basin funding in the first cycle, but also about $572,000 of statewide funds. And is there a possibility that if they all get approved, the state might dip into or ask the local funds to be available for that statewide amount?
So was that project or those projects already submitted to CWCB? So like, are they in the CWCB review process?
They're in the queue, yes.
They're in the queue. So as long as they're not, as long as they've already been submitted to us, like at the December deadline, or the sorry, October deadline, those are incorporated in the money that is left over right now. So as long as those, like if they get approved by the board, they'll still be eligible for statewide funds. So basically what I'm saying is to give you all a heads up, anything moving forward, there's only basin funds available. So anything you've already submitted to us with those statewide funds, as long as they get approved by the board, should be fine. That
answers my question.
Yeah, there is a possibility. I think the amount of applications for statewide funds was a little bit more than we had available. But we're currently working with applicants on that to see if there's anything that we can do. I don't know that we have a strategy for that. It wasn't a ton of money. So chances are Ben typically does that, works with the budget and stuff like that. And most of the time those adjustments come out of the statewide fund anyways. But so there is a potential that all of the statewide applicants might have to take a little bit of a cut on their projects, but I don't foresee that happening. So right now, yeah, everything that's in the queue is all good as long as it gets approved by the board.
Just maybe a quick follow-up. If the timing is such that there is a request of the local funds to maybe dip into those because of what you just mentioned, when would that occur? Because our 3 grants are scheduled to be reviewed and hopefully approved by the CWCB board at the March meeting.
Yeah, so I don't know of a time where we've asked, roundtables to kick in more money. So I wouldn't worry about that necessarily. I think more realistically is we probably dip into the reserve a little bit if those projects, needed to be funded. But I don't know. We haven't come up with a strategy yet. Right now, Ben's working his magic behind the scenes. But I don't see a reality in which we would reach back out to you and say, hey, this project's underfunded, kick in more money. I guess there's a possibility that an applicant could do that. But those would be, reheard by the board. So you've got time. We're just trying to kind of get in front of this because I know those projects are sort of in development already. And we're tracking this pretty closely and just wanted to make sure that nobody applies for a statewide grant, when there's no funds available. So.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. Any other questions on that?
Yeah, just this will be the case, Jeff, this is Ken Brents, this will be the case through, July 1st or longer.
This will be the case moving forward. In the criteria and guidelines, we do, like I mentioned before, have that opportunity for a special funding something. So if the board or the legislature or both decide, we've got extra money here, put it in WSRF like they did in 2022, we could return to it. Given the current budget circumstances, I'm not sure that's on the horizon, but that always ebbs and flows year to year, seemingly maybe even month to month, it seems like. But so there is a possibility, and the criteria and guidelines allow for it. We wouldn't have to go through a major shift. We did that on purpose in 2022, is to just, if that windfall event happens again, we can just put that money in there, reinstitute the statewide account, and go back to that. But so I don't know of anything coming right now. That's the circumstance. So moving forward till we hear something different. But if we do hear something different, you'll be the first to know, all y'all.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Mhm.
So you want to continue on you have more updates to do?
Yeah, I do have just a couple more. I wanted to mention a couple forthcoming CWCB reports. One that I think many of you will be interested in is the Water Plan Progress Report. For those of you that have been involved in the Basin Roundtables through the last water plan implementation, you might remember the ripple effects document that we kind of did in the time between water plan updates. So this progress report is designed to kind of take the place of that and be reflective of the updated water plan, but it offers a glimpse of all the hard work CWCB and our partners have done advancing agency actions in the water plan since 2023. It's really designed to, it highlights, exemplary projects through case studies, and the majority of the report focuses on the results of those projects funded by CWCB and others, with a special emphasis on water plan grant recipients. But, advancing the water plan objectives requires a lot of commitment and dedication from CWCB staff, but also all of you doing the boots on the ground work. So this is kind of just a way to update you all on the progress of the water plan and the implementation, but also celebrate, a lot of that work that you all do in the basin and across the state. The other one that's coming, so that one I think will be available at Water Congress, is the plan there. It's kind of in its final internal review stages right now. And then there's another one coming. It is 10 strategies to protect irrigated agriculture. And this one is really a culmination of the Water Plan Agency Action 2.6, which was designed to assess the value that agriculture provides to our state and identify strategies to actively protect irrigated agriculture. So Action 2.6 was really thought of to provide the CWCB, but also local governments and stakeholders a number of strategies to assess the potential indirect and direct impacts of reducing irrigated acreage, or taking that ag land and converting it to other uses. So that one will also have at Water Congress. Some of you might have seen maybe a 2-pager about that, kind of outlining those 10 strategies at C9 or some county commissioner meetings that we've been at. But really, this is just kind of designed to be a tool and a resource for folks. So yeah, looking forward to getting that one out. And then let's see. I also just had some funding reminders for you all, the February 1st WSRF deadline, and a reminder that no statewide funds are available there. But also Ashley is in the room, I think. So if you want to jump in, feel free, but all the regional grant managers asked me to just remind folks that letters of support for water plan grant applications need to be submitted with the application to be considered and included in the application packet. And then I also just wanted to let everyone know that the ARPA funding that CWCB is administering, so that's the funding for the Wildfire Ready Watersheds program, the Groundwater Sustainability Program, and then the Federal Technical Assistance and Local Capacity Programs. All of that funding was committed to projects and grants before the December 31st federal deadline. So the next step is to get those funds contracted and spent over the next 2 years. We have 2 years to spend all that funding. So kudos to all of you who were able to get projects off the ground to utilize that funding. I know it was kind of a rapid fire type of thing, but a lot of great work being done with those funds too. I think that's all I've got. Certainly be around for questions, or I'll take some questions now too if there are any.
Okay, anybody in the room have a question for Jeff? Anybody online have a question for Jeff? I think you're good, Jeff.
Making it easy on me. All right.
We'll come back. Jackie, are you still around? You want to do your update now? Yeah, she said she was, so. Okay, so, yep, so I moved Jackie down to item, number 11, because she was gonna be busy right at this exact time slot when I got her scheduled, so. Water Commissioners Corner, Amy?
Hi, yeah, thank you. I'm gonna try to share my screen. Oh. Okay, sorry.
Who said quit our share?
There we go. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes. Yes.
Great, okay. Well, thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm gonna run through a few quick updates on Colorado River issues and interstate issues in particular. Always appreciate having the opportunity to do a dry run with the Big River Committee because it helps me figure out what I actually want to say and what my slides should actually look like. So thanks for that rehearsal. Okay, so a few just quick general Colorado River updates. I'm sure you have already heard about this, but the bill that was pending to reauthorize System Conservation Pilot Program did not make it through in the last Congress. So SCPP is not currently reauthorized going forward. So that's one note. And the rest of what I'm going to talk about is really going to be on the post-2026 negotiation side of things. So the negotiations for the post-2026 operations of Powell and Mead and kind of where we are in that process. So you guys are probably aware that Reclamation has released a matrix of 5 potential alternatives for the post-2026 operations of Powell and Mead. We are hesitant to talk about this in a lot of detail at this point, simply because we have very little information on what the alternatives actually are and what they mean. We've gotten about 5 bullet points on each one, so we're hesitant to offer too many comments until we have more information from Reclamation and better understand what each of them actually are. So we're waiting on more details. We expect Reclamation to put out more information on that soon. But in the meantime, you know, we've really been focusing on trying to continue the basin state discussions and really trying to reinitiate healthy 7-state discussions going into 2025. So that's what we're really focused on now. Same time, we continue to really stand by the alternative that we put forward as 4 upper division states back in March. We have done some things to refine and improve it though, and that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. So I'm sure you all remember our infographics and hearing all of us talk about this a whole lot. So I'm going to start there with what we've already talked about on the left side of the screen here. The upper division states alternative, again, we submitted it in March. And just a refresher, some really key components here. This is a supply-driven approach. It's meant to have supply-driven operations of Powell and Mead. As we know, a big reason that the 07 guidelines have failed is because they're really demand-driven. So what has happened over the course of the 07 guidelines is that you've seen record low inflows, record drought in the Colorado River Basin throughout the course of the 07 guidelines. Lower basin uses have continued to be pretty high and in some cases have risen. Overuse in the lower basin draws down Lake Mead because of the way the 07 guidelines work. Low Mead means a higher release out of Powell. So we've watched as both the reservoirs have declined to critical levels. So we're trying to not do that again. We are proposing that we switch to a supply-driven system where operations of Powell and Mead are based on actual hydrology rather than being driven by downstream demands. So the way that we went about that in our upper division state alternative was to call for a Powell release curve that was based on actual contents of Powell. So that the idea there is that the contents of Powell would be an indicator of hydrologic conditions. So that's what we've done. And you see here on the left side, the upper division state alternative, the Powell release curve as we submitted it. And we've made just a couple of little tweaks to that release curve to make it perform even better. So essentially what we've done, I'm not going to go through all of this, but we have made the releases on the low end lower. So previously, you see we only went down to 6 million acre feet. In the refinements, we're going down to 5 million acre feet. At the high end, we have this place for a 12 million acre foot static release when Powell is really high, when we're getting close to flood control operations. Hard to imagine that happening anytime soon. But essentially what this does is, again, just provide for lower releases on the low end, higher releases on the high end. And what we know is that this performs just slightly better with these refinements. We also know that the upper division states alternative as submitted performed the best at protecting critical elevations at Powell and Mead. And this just means it does even better. So that is the Powell component of the upper division states alternative as refined. And I want to take a minute and go through the lower basin component here. So again, the deliveries made to lower basin contractors are based on hydrologic conditions. We take a combined storage approach. So you look at the contents of both Powell and Mead, and based on that combined storage level, the lower basin contractors are going to be facing certain reductions. But I want to be clear about what we're calling reductions and what we're calling this 1.5 million acre foot adjustment. So what we know is that in the lower basin, close to 1.5 million acre feet in evaporation and system losses occur each year. So in our alternative, in most circumstances, the lower basin states are going to be making an adjustment, or calling it an adjustment rather than a reduction, to account for that evaporation and system loss. So again, this kind of ramps up when Powell and Mead together are between 75 and 92% full. And then you see just a static adjustment of 1.5 million acre feet under most conditions. And then we call this the lower ramp, where things have gotten pretty bad at Powell and Mead, and the lower basin is taking reductions in this case of an additional 0 to 2.4 million acre feet. So put that all together, if you add the 1.5 and the 2.4, the lower basin might be taking reductions of up to 3.9 million acre feet when things get really bad. Something to note here, that would put lower basin uses, if they're on that lower ramp and taking 3.9, they're taking reductions of about 30% relative to their existing demands. And I'm just going to ask you to keep that number in your mind as we move to the next slide. This is something we've really struggled with. There's a lot here, but this is what I want to start with, is that we've talked about hydrologic shortage a lot. We've also heard this question or this rhetoric of what are the upper division states contributing? And we want to be very, very clear about what we're contributing and how. We know that when the lower basin states are on that second ramp and they're taking 30% reductions, we are also taking hydrologic shortage to the tune of 30%. What that means is that our water users are in the upper basin are using about 30% less than their demonstrated demands, sometimes maybe even more. We know that in the upper basin, across the upper basin, hydrologic shortage averages 1.2 million acre feet. And again, just to be clear about what that is the difference between our demonstrated demands, what we know has been put to beneficial use across the upper basin, versus what we are taking in a dry year due to hydrologic shortage. So, this isn't our uses relative to our compact apportionment, it's our uses relative to demands that we have shown we will put to use. And I think that's a really important point. So the upper division states alternative and this upper division states alternative as refined include this concept of hydrologic shortage. And what we're saying here is that there needs to be recognition that when the lower basin states are taking those cuts, they're on that lower ramp, we're right there with them. We are taking proportionate reductions through hydrologic shortage. We also have, of course, these concepts of parallel activities, where if our alternative is adopted, we would be looking at voluntary conservation measures and strategic releases from upstream initial units, but in ways that will work for the upper division states. And those would be subject to separate agreements, not part of the post-2026 package, but separate agreements that would be reached if our alternative were to be adopted. And what we're asking for is that a reasonable range of conservation be considered. There are a lot of ideas about what the upper division states could conserve or should conserve. And, the point we want to make here is look at how much we conserved in SCPP, for example, and make sure that we're being realistic about what the upper division states might be able to contribute, particularly in really dry years. We might not have a whole lot. The other note that I'll make here is that if you look at that matrix of alternatives that Reclamation has put forward, they are opening the door for consideration of undeveloped settled tribal water rights. They are calling for quantification of those rights. So we're also including information about that. If, for example, how much water could be conserved should be included in that potential pool in Powell of undeveloped but settled tribal water rights. Let's see. The other point, just sorry to backtrack a little bit, the other point I want to make about this proportionate reductions, which is just a really critical point, is that, so even when the lower basin is on that lower ramp, even when they're taking 3.9 million acre feet of reductions, which includes that 1.5 million acre foot adjustment, and we're taking our 30% hydrologic shortage, they're still using a lot more than us, right? Because their denominator, their uses were bigger to begin with. So sometimes you hear people say, well, the upper basin wants to have the lower basin to use equal amount of water. They want us to be down with them and at 3.5 million acre foot level. That's not the case at all. And if you actually look at our alternative and what we've put forward, what we're calling for is just proportionate reductions, 30% or so relative to current demands. So this is a point that I feel like it just gets lost a lot in the narrative and the rhetoric, and it's something that we're really trying to work on getting out there. So that's everything I have. Again, we're in this interesting time in the middle of the NEPA process. We're, in the midst of a change in federal administration. So we are forging ahead and trying to make progress with the basin states, but also recognizing that we're in the midst of some change. And so there's some uncertainty in how things are going to go and the timeline for how things are going to go at the federal level. So we'll continue to do our best with that uncertainty. Yeah, that's everything I have. I'm happy to take any questions you all might have.
So Mimi, thanks for that. I know how much you hate to speculate, so I'm not gonna ask you to, because usually you leave that to me. I'm much more willing, but just for context for the roundtable here. What really happened here? So the Bureau makes a big splash, or at least something of a splash. They put out this document which outlines 5 alternatives, which, by the way, we're gonna talk about in just a few minutes here. And then a few weeks after that, they let it be understood, well, by the way, each of those 5 alternatives does not map very closely to either proposal submitted by Lower Basin or by us. And then a few weeks after that, they let it be understood by you, and I suppose your counterparts in the Lower Basin, that they would entertain refinements to those proposals, none of which were really listed in their NEPA document. So what happened here?
See, you're trying to make me speculate, and you know me too well. I said I wouldn't, but I don't. Here's the deal. There's a lot of reading tea leaves in these situations, right? So, we can piece together some things Reclamation has said and understand that there are certain things that they would like to see in alternatives that are submitted. We also, were able to do some technical work on our end and recognize that, there are some tweaks that we could make to our Powell rule curve, for example, to make it perform a little bit better, to make sure that Powell is even less likely to hit those very, very critical elevations than it was in our already submitted alternative. So we were trying to do our best with the information we had to optimize what we already had out there, which we felt pretty good about. What Reclamation will do with that, I really can't tell you. I'm not going to speculate about it, especially with the change in federal administration. It's really impossible to say. But I think it is important to note that the matrix of alternatives that was put out, that's not a draft EIS, right? That is not a full analysis of alternatives submitted. It is a few bullet points for each one, concepts that Reclamation has put out. So the door has not been closed on NEPA analysis. That's kind of the important thing. So we are still in that window where it makes sense to optimize what we can, put our best foot forward, and where we go from there, we really don't know.
And so I said I wasn't gonna ask you to speculate, I did, so I apologize, but basically what you said at the end, I think, is the thing that makes the most sense. Even though they documented these things and gave them a name, right? Each of these alternatives has a name. That apparently didn't mean that was what they were intending to go forward in the NEPA process with, absolutely. But that the door was still open for both Lower Basin and us to add to our proposals, modify those, and try to meet the Bureau's requirements in that way. Close enough?
That's fair. Yep.
Okay. Thanks for all your work and for spending your holiday on this and everything you do to defend the Colorado River. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much for the kind words. And wasn't the best way to spend the holidays, but I'm working on getting over it.
Hey, Amy, this is Steve Hinkmeyer. We've talked a lot about these Colorado River issues. So the current plan that we're under that's gonna expire in 2027, I guess, was a 20-year plan. Is there any time frame being set for what these 5 NEPA analysis are they gonna analyze into perpetuity? Are they gonna analyze like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Have you heard anything on that timeline?
Yeah, I mean, you can analyze different options on a number of different time frames, and of course the reliability kind of goes down the farther you try to look out. But you can use historic hydrology and make some assumptions and get some ideas about how things will operate, into the future, of course. But I think to the broader question of what time frame of a deal makes sense, I think it all depends on the deal. It all depends on the what is contained in that deal and how long we think that will be good enough, right? So there have been a lot of time frames thrown out, but I think it really depends on what's in the 4 corners of a potential deal. So it's just hard to say, I think sitting here today, what the appropriate time frame would be. I think it's fair to say that there is a desire to have some certainty into the future, to not be in this negotiation mode all the time. I mean, personally, I would really like to have a work-life balance again one day. That would be great. But more generally, I think that when we have certainty, everyone is better off. So that's what I would say. If we can get a longer term deal, I think that's great. But again, it really just depends on the facts and circumstances of the particular, 4 corners of a potential deal.
So at the end of the day, that may be a negotiation point. Or how long the length of this agreement might be.
Yeah, if I heard that question correctly, that a negotiation point. Yeah, certainly.
Okay, thank you. Anybody? Oh, Ken?
Amy, Ken Brenner, the third bullet under no action, it talks about the releases being around 8.23, unless required or unless it's higher release required for equalization or a lower release because of infrastructure limitations. The equalization, so if this were for some reason to stay because of a delayed final decision or what, does this mean that we're back operating, that they're just extending the 2007 operating agreements until there's a new one approved? Or why is equalization still in there?
There's a lot there a lot in what you just said. So I'm going to just try to break this down. So let's be very clear that the 07 guidelines, by definition, by their own terms, can't just be, the no action alternative cannot be to extend the 07 guidelines. By their terms, they expire. So to extend them would require a federal action. So that is our position. What does that mean? What does operating under the long range operating criteria actually mean? I think that's where, things get a little bit more complicated. That's where we need to start talking about 602A storage. How much water are the upper division states going to be able to hold back in Powell in our upstream initial units that we don't have to release downstream? And I'll just be honest, there are differing, opinions about what that would look like. We strongly disagree with the idea that there would be a minimum objective release of 8.23 million acre feet, or that should be, the default. We also know that wouldn't work at Lake Powell, given where it is today and what future hydrology is likely to be. We also would very much disagree with, the concept of equalization as it has played out in the 07 guidelines. But here's the thing. Again, we have just a few bullets on each of these alternatives. So what do they mean by equalization? We don't really know yet. So we are waiting to see what that means. What we do know is that the way equalization has worked in the 07 guidelines, essentially dumping water from Lake Powell to balance it with Lake Mead, that doesn't work very well for us. So we don't like that. We need to see what reclamation actually is talking about here to better understand it. But there are a lot of levels of complication there. But again, I think it's important to note that that, you know, continuation of the 07 guidelines is not the no action in this case.
Good, thank you. Any other questions for Amy in the room or online? All right, Amy, I think you're off the hook. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks everyone, good to see you.
All right, good to see you. Thank you. All right, grant committee, update, Frank Alphone.
Well, Sally, do you want to pull up the slides for me, please?
1 second.
While she's doing that, I apologize that I was unable to make it this evening. I had a little surgery on Friday, and this is what I got in return. So on the doctor's recommendation, I wasn't supposed to drive. So that's my excuse for not being there. But I would have preferred to be there in person, but just didn't work out. Sally, I think you got the slides for the next presentation up.
Oh, how about that one?
His are under
Oh,
the
wait,
grant.
I'm not, yeah. Hold on 1 second.
76.
Just a second.
So go under grant committee
Yeah.
information.
1 sec. I just have to redo it. I can pull it up.
It's the only PowerPoint there. It shows up third on mine.
I know, it's,
Oh.
it's, well, I do have it. The grand.
Frank, since you showed us your cast on your hand, I think it's only right that Comstock be required.
Yeah.
The point is to vice down to his ankle and show us his cast. Come on, Jeff.
All right, there it is, Sally. Thank you.
Ah, you're saved by the bell, Comstock.
Yeah, it's that one right in the middle there, Sally.
It's on the top line, the third, the end one to the right. Can we pull it up?
There it is.
That's good.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Why don't you go to the second slide, Sally, please? Okay, so what I'd like to speak to tonight is just give everyone a quick update on the grant program funding, just as a kind of a piggyback onto what Jeff was talking about earlier. There's 2 action items that I want the board or the Basin Roundtable members to consider. The proposed new grant scoring matrix, and then the revised letter of support guidelines. We're then going to hear from my colleague, Bo Cahill, on the Yampa River Restoration Project. We are looking for a letter of support from the Basin Roundtable meeting this evening. The documents that I provided that were in the packet included the draft meeting minutes from the last meeting, which was December 11th. And then both the existing and proposed scoring matrices were in that packet of information, and then the revised letter of support guidelines. And I took the liberty of putting the proposed red line changes on that guidelines document. So that's our agenda for this evening. Next slide, please, Sally. Just a quick overview of where the Basin Roundtable stands from a funding status. We had 3 grants that were approved at the November Basin Roundtable meeting. Of those grants, $192,000 was from the local funds, and then about $572,000 from the statewide funds. Those three grants will be considered and hopefully approved at the March CWSCB board meeting. We did not have any second cycle grant applications, so we have nothing to review at this meeting. And then the third cycle, which closes as far as the applications on January 15th, is next Wednesday. So right now, if everything is approved at the state level, going into the third cycle and for the remainder of the year, we'd have about $518,000. And just to maybe reemphasize what Jeff was saying, any grants coming forward to the grants committee and then ultimately to the Basin Roundtable, we would have about $518,000 available. Next slide, please. So the first thing I want to talk about is the proposed new scoring matrix. For folks that have heard me talk about this over the last couple of meetings, we've been speaking about this for several months now, and the grants committee at their last meeting talked in depth about the new scoring matrix, and now we're at a point where we'd like to come to the Basin Roundtable for a formal adoption of that scoring matrix. Both the existing and the proposed were in the packet. I don't necessarily want to go through the differences line by line, but I will kind of give everyone a quick overview of kind of the changes and what were some of the differences between the existing and the proposed. The proposed one, we all agreed at the grants committee that it's much easier to use, and it seems to provide a little bit more consistent scoring across the committee members. The existing one was, I'll say, heavily weighted on the Basin implementation plan goals, which was great. But the second, or the revised one, if you will, or the proposed one, not only looks at scoring on the goals, but also looks at other items like what user groups the grants might be benefiting. It looks at the project scope and how that project scope might be defined, measurable, and also how we monitor it. We also added a reviewer's comments box, which will provide each reviewer on the grants committee an opportunity to put notes in there, comments and or questions that might be critical to kind of making a decision on what those final scores are. We also think that the new scoring matrix will give us the better ability to accommodate a larger or broader range of proposals. So that's a very high level overview of both the old and the new. But what we would like consideration tonight is just an official approval of a new grant scoring matrix, which we would start using into the future full-time moving forward. So with that, I'll open up to any questions and or comments. And Steve, you might have to help me in the room there if anyone has their hands up.
Yeah, I don't see anybody with hands up. I guess I'll just make a comment on the original matrix that we've been using. Was developed in 2018 when we put together the grants committee and our current process, and we hadn't really scored any grants to speak of when we adopted the first round of the initial matrix. So I agree with Frank. I think it was time to just update it, make it a little easier to use, and make it so that the things that we thought are important as a membership get built into potential scoring. So I think we're good here. Anybody online have a question for Frank?
Ken's down, stand up.
Oh, Ken, yes.
Runner recommends approval of the new scoring matrix.
Second,
Have a
Vandenbrink.
motion. Oh, have a motion and a second. Motion by Ken, second by Alden. Any further discussion?
It's not perfect, but it's better and we'll keep working on it.
Yes.
Good point.
Yeah, it's definitely better.
Okay,
So-
next,
Oh, well, let's vote on it.
Yeah.
So, hearing no further discussion, all in favor of adopting the new grant scoring matrix, please say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Okay, you guys have it. That's passed. Thanks, Frank.
thank you.
Frank.
All right, the next item, which is an action item, is the revised letter of support guidelines or policy. This letter of support guidelines was put in place in 2024 and has worked pretty well with respect to the process. The proposed red lines or changes were included in the board's materials packet, if you will. And I guess what I'd like to start off with is the preferred method for an applicant to get a letter of support is to first go to the grants committee and get on a grants committee agenda and have the presentation done there first, and then have the grants committee move it to the next level or to the Basin Roundtable for consideration. So that has not been changed in this proposed change of the guidelines. What we tried to change or really kind of fine tune is, and this would be the main revision that we're asking for consideration tonight is, we want to make sure that we keep our meetings as efficient and as timely as possible. So if an applicant does in fact miss the grants committee meeting and needs a letter of support before the next grants committee meeting, we would certainly at the Basin Roundtable level consider that level of support. And the existing guidelines really didn't have any timeline to submit that letter of support request to the Basin Roundtable board. So what we want to do is add some language that if any applicant wants the Basin Roundtable board to consider a letter of support, that they advise and make that request 1 week prior to the Basin Roundtable meeting. So what you see there, thanks, Sally, under number 2 is that we want the request to be submitted 1 week prior, or generally at the same time that the executive committee meets. So the executive committee can include that letter of support request in the agenda, make sure we have enough time, and again, to make those meetings as efficient as possible. And the grants committee is making this recommendation to the board for consideration. So that's what we're asking for. Again, emphasis on is to make sure that everyone tries to go to the grants committee meeting first, but if they don't make it, there's an avenue to go to the Basin Roundtable meeting. So with that said, any questions or comments on what we're asking for this evening with respect to this item?
Makes sense. I move we adopt.
So we have a motion by Jeff. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, a second by Will. Okay, any further discussion on the changes to the letter of support guidelines?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
it's just everybody may not attend the executive committee meetings. I know you don't. But we actually try really hard to structure of the meeting, Steve's gone way above and beyond the call of duty. I mean, he schedules every item on here to the minute. So, and I know it doesn't seem like it, but that we honestly really try to be efficient with your time. The surprise letters of support requests are a significant additional thing that we want to accommodate. Just please, can you give us at least a week in advance to make sure that we can accommodate that request? That's all, thanks.
Okay, any other comments from online? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of approving the changes made to the letter of support guidelines, please say aye.
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 Okay, opposed, say nay. Okay, you guys have it. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a project that is, we're asking, and maybe before I start, Steve, do you want me to recuse myself now, or do you want me to kind of tee this one up and then you take it over? How do you want to handle this one? Since it's, Mount Warner Water, who I work for, is the applicant this evening.
Yeah, I think you just recuse yourself from the vote,
Okay.
right? That works for me, and Kristen, just make sure that we know that Frank's not voting on this letter of support. So go ahead.
Okay, I'll just do a quick intro and then we'll let Bo Cahill take it over. Tonight, Mount Warner Water is asking for consideration for a letter of support for a project that we're doing on a stretch of the Yampa River, which is within land owned by Mount Warner Water, but also owned by our neighboring partner, Ed MacArthur. So we're working with Ed on a project to do a stream bank erosion protection plan, if you will, on that stream bank area. So we're not asking for any grant money tonight. We're just asking for a letter of support. We've got about 15 minutes allocated for this presentation. Bo, who's going to take it over here shortly, thinks he can be done in 5 or 6 or 7 minutes. Then we'll open up for Q&A, and then I'll certainly recuse myself from voting and turn it over to Steve. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Bo Cahill. Bo Cahill is a project manager for Mount Warner Water, and he's the one that has been managing this project since inception. So Bo, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Frank. And I also apologize for not being there in person tonight. I had originally planned to be there, but I also had surgery last week. I do promise that we're not putting anything in the water up here between Frank and I's surgery. But with that said, just to kind of piggyback off what Frank said, I'm here to present a stream bank erosion mitigation project that we are undertaking. We plan to begin construction on this project in the summer of 2025. I'll start just kind of with a little more detail on our project location. So this project is on the Yampa River in Steamboat Springs, just on the southern boundary of the city of Steamboat Springs limit. And the graphic you're looking at now, in the top end of that graphic, the Steamboat Christian Center represents the boundary of Steamboat Springs. As we move south, we have Snow Country Nursery, and then into the district-owned parcel, which is also an infiltration gallery, and then our neighbor Ed MacArthur on the furthest parcel to the south. So we are seeing erosion across the MacArthur parcel and the district parcel on both sides of the river. This erosion starts on the end of the MacArthur project parcel and continues all the way through the district parcel before terminating on the boundary line for the Snow Country Nursery parcel. The reason this erosion terminates on the Snow Country Nursery property line boundary is they have already completed an erosion mitigation project in 2023. So with our project partner, Ed MacArthur, we are looking to address the erosion across the MacArthur parcel, the district parcel, and then tie into that completed erosion project in Snow Country Nursery. Sally, next slide, please. So the erosion that we are seeing across these two parcels is occurring at about 5 feet per year on average. The pictures you're looking at on the screen now, the one on the left is taken in the fall of 2023. The one on the right was taken in the summer of 2024. As you can see between these two pictures, in just 1 year, the erosion is quite significant. In certain locations, we have lost up to 8 feet per year. What this erosion is doing and why it's causing such a problem for us in the river is, one, it's threatening our infiltration gallery. This is a water source for the Mount Warner Water District, the city of Steamboat. If we ever had a wildfire in the Fish Creek watershed, this would become the primary water source for the district and the city of Steamboat. This is also threatening upstream and downstream neighbors and their land interests, especially the downstream neighbor at Snow Country Nursery. If we are not to mitigate this erosion, it would continue migrating downstream, eventually undermine their completed project and his property interest. It's also threatening some trees that were planted by the Yampa Valley Sustainability Council along this stretch of riverbank. These trees you can see in the picture on the right, they were parted as a part of the ReTree program, and they are intended to grow big and tall and provide shade to the river, which reduces surface water temperature and water temperature, and also contributes to the riparian habitat. What this is also doing is just producing negative effects on the river. We're having more and more sedimentation falling into the river, decreasing water quality, and we're also having significant impact on habitat in two ways. One, we are just losing habitat with the erosion, and then we're creating undesirable habitat in these backwater areas that breed non-native northern pike. Sally, next slide, please. So the design concept we have settled on to address this erosion is what we are calling a soft solution design concept. The primary basis of this design concept is using trees kind of anchored into the riverbank, perpendicular to the riverbank. Then we will then regrade that vertical bank so it's not graded and build it back up with natural material that we will mostly harvest from the surrounding area. On top of that natural material, we will then revegetate with local grasses, native grasses, and then reincorporate those Sustainability Council trees that you saw in that previous photo. If we can save the original trees, that would be ideal, but the Sustainability Council has committed to work with us to replant those trees if necessary. Some benefits of this design in a soft solution compared to like a hard solution is using the trees and the natural and native material and revegetation. We're allowing that bank to absorb some of the riverbank's energy. We're allowing it to move through that anchoring in the stream bank without causing further erosion. That's in contrast to a hard solution approach, which you would use boulders or hard material to really anchor that stream bank. While effective to prevent erosion, all that does is accelerate the river velocity and produce further problems downstream. Some other benefits of this project are related to the river itself. With these trees planted perpendicular to the river, every 5 feet we will have a root wad that protrudes a little bit into the river. This provides great habitat for fish. We will also be removing those backwater areas that have been created by the erosion where those non-native northern pike breed. Another component of this project is the use of a J-hook. This photo shows 4, but we will use 3. The J-hook is intended to provide a little bit of a relief from that stream bank by redirecting a bit of the river's energy away from that stream bank and into the center of the channel of the river. This design concept has been used successfully upstream at Chuck Lewis Wildlife Area by Parks and Wildlife, and we see this concept as a continuation of that work. The design phase of this project is about 95% complete. There might be some just very minor tweaks to come to be determined, but we're about 95% there on the design phase of this project. Sally, next slide, please. So the last slide I'll talk about is just the project financials, and I'll just caveat this is strictly related to the construction portion of this project. We anticipate beginning construction hopefully July, August of this year, And the total estimated cost for construction has been estimated by our engineer at $807,240. We have applied for a grant through the Colorado Conservation Board for half of this amount. The other half of these funds will be supplied by Mountain of Water, our project partner and neighbor Ed MacArthur, and potentially other sources of funds as well. Our request tonight from the Basin Roundtable is to gain a letter of support. We think this is a good project for support from the Basin Roundtable for a few reasons. It aligns with a lot of the goals. Stream bank instability aligns with a lot of the goals of the Basin Implementation Plan. But I'll kind of highlight two. Is the first goal is we are protecting a critical municipal water supply. This could have effects on municipal water supply shortages down in the future, and then also the other goal of protecting environmental and recreational water uses. Our stated benefits to habitat directly help and achieve this Basin Implementation Plan goal. The letter of support, if approved, would join a slew of letters of support that we have already received. We have received letters of support from upstream and downstream neighbors, the Yampa Valley Sustainability Council, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And with that, I will open it up to questions and comments, please.
Ken?
Hey, Bo, or maybe it's a better question for Frank. Frank, I know that the city of Steamboat and Mount Warner Water have invested a lot of money in having a redundant water supply in the event of a wildfire in Fish Creek where the primary water supply is. I know you just installed a large infiltration gallery there over the last couple of years. Do you remember approximately the investment that was made to develop that infiltration gallery that we're trying to protect here?
Yeah, good question, Ken. And yes, I remember how much it cost. It was about $2.5 million just to put the infiltration gallery in place. In addition to that, we spent upwards of about $3.5 million to do upgrades to our Yampa Wells treatment plant to not only satisfy regulatory requirements, but also to upgrade our capacity that we could produce out of that plant. So between those two projects alone, it was about $5.5 million. The other project that's ongoing now, the City of Steamboat Springs, is developing 4 new vertical wells on the west side of the river on land that they own, and that water will also be used to service our district and also the city, and we hope to bring those online sometime next year. I don't know exactly the cost of that one, Ken, but I suspect it's upwards of $1 million, if not more.
Thank you. Well, and so the point being that the city has done a good job, not only trying to develop fully redundant water supplies, but also using what we probably have to refer to as best management practices for the stability of this bay. And for that reason, I would like to recommend support for approval of a letter of support from the Warner Water Yampa River Steamboat Erosion Project.
Davis would second that.
Okay. Hang on. Do I have a, who seconded? I'm sorry, I missed it. Doug Davis did, okay. All right, have a motion and a second. Any further discussion, Scott?
Yeah, Frank, Scott Cowman. And I guess I'm just being devil's advocate here a little bit. This migration seems like, but it's natural migration within the floodplain. And we know there's benefits to allowing that migration to take place. However, what it sounds like is there's a lot of values at risk that make us want to do this project and put in those structures. So, and then I think taking that soft approach addresses some of that. So I guess what I'm looking for is just some transparency about, and I think you said it pretty clear about what the benefits are versus, detriments from not allowing the channel to migrate within the floodplain. So just kind of being devil's advocate on that. Also, I'm wondering, of any, planning requirements on the part of the county, and if any of those discussions have taken place, or, if the timing of that isn't quite there yet. So those are the two things. Thanks.
Yeah, no, good comment, Scott. And I think I'll turn it over to Bo because he's working closely with the county. And Bo, if you want to fill everyone in on the status of that, that'd be great.
Yeah, first I'll just address kind of the channel migration, and I hear you. You know, the use of a J hook, is it the perfect design? You know, probably not, but we do. You know, in terms of high water, I don't think those J hooks are going to be too impactful to redirecting that stream energy and using that soft solution and regrading that vertical bank. You know, that is about 5 to 6 feet now, and high water especially. The river should be able to move through that stream anchoring and onto the floodplain. But yeah, I absolutely hear your concerns, and it's something we're thinking about. Onto the county planning aspect. So we're going to need a couple of permits from the county, one being a floodplain development permit, and then the other being a grade and fill permit. We have reached out to the county for initial conversations, but that is where we are in the process of attempting to get those permits here in the next couple of months. The other permit we would need is a regional number 37 permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, which allows us to perform stream bank restoration work for an area of riverbank under 1,000 linear feet. And then our project is going to mitigate 615 linear feet of riverbank.
That's great. I appreciate that. And if you wouldn't mind including me on correspondence with planning, I'd just like to be a part of that process, as I often am with things like this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Doug Bunker?
So just a couple quick comments. So I appreciate the project, and I'm very much in support of the project. I just want to know, have you talked to the Friends of Yampa and the scorecard project? You know, they're all enticing of chaos and mayhem. You know, when they did the scorecard project down in the lower Yampa, we wanted the Beaver Dam analogs and all this stuff happening, you know, so we want chaos and mayhem. So I'm just laughing here. I'm totally supportive of the project, but we need to figure out what the science is here, really. We're way off on a whole bunch of things, and I'm totally supportive of this project and what it's trying to do. Stabilization, you know, minimal maintenance, not catastrophic river restoration and rest. So it's just my comments. It's just crazy what we do here sometimes.
Okay, thanks, Doug. All right, any further questions or comments here in the room or online? We have a motion on the table in a second. There is a draft letter on the website. It didn't make it into the packet, but there is one. I will probably rewrite the section on the basic implementation plan to more adequately address our BIP goals that apply to this project. All in favor of writing the Yampa White Green roundtable writing a letter of support for this project, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed, please say nay. Okay, you guys have it. Frank, I think you got one more slide left.
I do. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate the support for our project. The last slide I have was just to, I don't know, Sally, if you want to put it up or not. Basically, I just wanted to provide just some dates. The next grant cycle application deadline is January 15th. Our next grant meeting is February 12th. And of course, a shout out to all the committee members. We have a pretty robust committee and a lot of good participation. And I appreciate everyone's willingness to continue to serve and be part of that grants committee. So unless there's any other questions, that's the grants committee update for this meeting, Steve.
All right, thanks, Frank. Okay, so next on our agenda is dredge and fill rulemaking information gathering. Jennifer?
Hi, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Sorry I got here a little late. I was gonna walk around the campus for a little while. My name is Jennifer Bach. I'm the chair of the Colorado Water Control Commission, Colorado Water Quality Control Commission. It's a mouthful. And in my regular life, I'm assistant city attorney for the city of Steamboat Springs. So I get to work with Frank on some projects. Just thank you for giving us some time tonight. We'll try to keep it concise. As a commissioner, I'm going to chair this rulemaking at the latter part of this year, and we'll talk a little bit more about the commission's process. But our policy experts who've been drafting up regulations related to dredge and fill are going to go through the origins and the story behind this rulemaking that we hope to hear from you at the end of the year. So I'm going to pass it promptly on to our experts, Annette and Kelly, and let them introduce themselves online.
Hi, thank you for having us. My name is Annette Quill. I am a policy advisor for the Water Quality Control Division, and I'll hand it off to Kelly to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Morgan. I'm also with the Water Quality Control Division, and I manage our compliance and enforcement section, which houses our new dredge and fill protection unit.
Great. And yeah, so whoever is running the slides, you can go ahead, pass the introductions, and we'll kick it off here to the overview.
Okay.
So
How many terrible is running the slides for you?
okay, so I presume that many of you are familiar with the new law and were perhaps even involved in the legislative process. So I'll just provide a really brief overview of the purpose and scope of House Bill 241379. And then Kelly will discuss the divisions, the implementation of the program on the Water Quality Control Divisions end. And then I'll come back and talk, as Commissioner Bach said, about the components of the rule that we have drafted, a very initial draft of that came out about a month ago. And she'll talk about the commission's process in adopting the rules. So on May 30th of this last year, the bill was signed into law. The intent of the legislation was to ensure that state waters are protected in response to the Supreme Court's Sackett decision. The bill was signed into law, like I said, just over a year ago. It became effective on July 1st. And as I'm sure most of you know, as the way the Supreme Court defined waters of the United States in a relatively narrow fashion compared to how it had been interpreted by the federal agencies for the last 50 years, that left a great deal of Colorado's streams and wetlands without federal protection. So that impacted our dredge and fill program because we had historically relied on the Corps to implement dredge and fill protections through Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. So the legislation was intended to fill that historic gap and allow the state to to implement its own program. But it's important to note that our program isn't intended to replace the Corps of Engineers program. It only applies to state waters that are no longer considered WOTUS. You can scroll down to the next slide. And so this, these three figures are just kind of a schematic meant to explain how, you know, our definition in Colorado of state waters has historically been very broad. You know, it's defined as all waters contained in or flowing through the state. It also includes groundwater and wetlands. Whereas the federal definition, you know, has always been a bit narrower, but then in the last 20 years, the Supreme Court has continued to narrow that definition. The Rapanos decision, you know, which narrowed the definition, requiring that significant nexus with a traditionally navigable water, you know, for wetlands. And then in Sackett, you see the last figure, it kind of, you know, narrowed that definition even more. And it's even, you know, in Colorado being, you know, the semi-arid state that it is, it really impacts a lot of our water bodies because we have so many headwaters, you know, ephemeral and intermittent streams that are no longer considered waters of the United States. So again, this statute is, you know, that was enacted last year is intended to protect all state waters, even isolated state waters, in terms of dredge and fill activities. But even with that broad definition and the broad scope of the program, there are numerous exempted activities that were included in the bill. If you can scroll down and we'll start kind of ticking through those to the exempted activities. So there are 13 exempted activities in all. The ones that you see here, the ones that are in that lighter green font, are the ones that are not part of the federal exempted framework. Those are the ones that Colorado has adopted, you know, separate from the federal program. But we started with the federal exemptions and then kind of expanded on those or tried to clarify those in a lot of places where stakeholders during the legislative process were wanting more clarification. So the first 4 exempted activities are intended to either grandfather activities that had already obtained a 404 permit or an HAD. And they also cover activities that will in the future going forward be covered under the federal framework. So generally, if you are doing work in a water feature where you're going to get a 404 permit, you're not also going to be required to get a permit from the state. There are some exceptions to that for larger projects where that would involve both WOTUS and non-WOTUS state waters. There may be kind of dual jurisdiction in those situations. And we're working with the Corps right now on how to handle those and kind of streamlining a process to, you know, work on those collectively, those projects. The 5th exemption is for normal farming and ranching activities, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. It's intended to essentially mirror the federal exemption, but it also contains a definition for upland soil and water conservation practices. Number 6, maintenance. You know, again, you know, this mirrors the federal exemption for maintenance activities for those types of structures that are listed here. The 7th exemption, I think, is a really important one. A lot of time and effort went into it during the legislative process. It's much more detailed than kind of the corresponding federal exemption and contains definitions of these terms: irrigation ditches, construction, maintenance. which I think serves to broaden the exemption beyond what the Army Corps of Engineers has typically used under the federal framework. And, you know, if you have questions about those, we can get into those a little bit later, but it was intended to be both broad and clear as to what those kind of, you know, construction and maintenance exemptions look like for irrigation ditches, farm ponds, stock ponds, and those types of features. And then if you go down to the next slide, exempted activities 8 through 13, I won't just kind of, if I'm not, am I seeing what you all are seeing? It's okay. Can you just kind of, okay, thank you. So 8 and 9, again, these exemptions are also federal exemptions, so you all might be familiar with those already. But 10 through 13 are Colorado specific exemptions that we included in the statute that apply to any of these activities would not require coverage under our authorization system. Next slide, excluded water features. So there are 11 excluded, or I'm sorry, there were 13 exempted activities. There's 11 excluded water features. This, you know, these are features that in any other context would likely be considered state waters, but for the context of dredge and fill activities, they do not require permits if you're doing work in any of these features. So these exclusions stand alone. In other words, if you're discharging fill material into any of these types of features, no matter what type of activity you're engaging in, you're not required to obtain authorization from the state. So, you know, without just reading through all of these, you can read, you know, what features are excluded. Again, we started with the excluded features, the excluded waters under, you know, the federal system under the definition of WOTUS. And then we added some of our own in the context of working with stakeholders in the bill drafting process. And those are, you know, the ones that are in that light green font. Those are the ones you won't see in the federal framework. So yeah, so I guess one thing I'll note is that most of these are features that are found in uplands, and so that's just kind of one thing to note. You can go down to the next slide beyond the excluded water features, so we can kind of. One thing I will point out, though, if you go back one slide, the last exclusion refers, you know, as folks are familiar with the prior converted cropland exclusion. One thing that we did in the bill was to define prior converted cropland consistent with the 2020 Navigable Water Protection Rule. In the preamble to that rule, there was a definition of prior converted cropland that a lot of people seem to think help, you know, clarify what the agencies, you know, had historically meant by that term. So we codified that into the statute. And so hopefully folks will find that helpful. Okay, next slide, implementation components. So the bill divides up responsibilities between the Water Quality Control Division and the Water Quality Control Commission. The division is the agency that is implementing the program. They will be developing and issuing individual and general authorizations, and they're also implementing the program in this kind of interim period before regulations are adopted. And we'll get into that more later, but they're the implementing agency, whereas the commission was charged with developing a regulation that kind of fills out the framework beyond what the bill does. That regulation is going to be titled Regulation 87. And again, the commission and Commissioner Bach will speak more to this later in this presentation. The commission will be actually adopting those rules with a proposal that'll come forth from the division that will be developed between the division and stakeholders over this next 11 months. Next slide, implementation. I'll turn it over to Kelly right now before I get into the draft rule itself, and she can talk about what is happening right now with respect to implementation on the division side as we're getting this program up and running.
Perfect. Thanks, Annette. First, I'd just like to start with a thank you for having us to participate in your meeting, and thank you for the virtual options. And so we're very happy to share what our division is doing right now. And I'll speak a little bit about implementation. As I mentioned, our dredge and fill protection unit is housed in our compliance and enforcement section. And just as a little bit of a background, in the immediate response to the Sackett decision, our division developed a policy which we called Clean Water Policy 17, which is essentially an enforcement discretion policy. And the background for that is the Water Quality Control Act prohibits any discharge of pollutants to state waters without a permit. And in the absence of a permitting program, we implemented this policy that did put some protections in place to ensure that we were protecting our state waters. And so any project that occurred between July 2023 and December 2024 would be occurring under the conditions of Clean Water Policy 17. Since then, the bill directs us to develop temporary authorizations beginning January 1st, 2025. And those temporary authorizations essentially recognize the core nationwide and regional general permit framework. What we tried to do is to be generally consistent with core requirements so that folks were familiar with the framework and kind of the background and essentially the requirements of those permits. And then from there, as Annette alluded to, and which we'll get into later, once the Regulation 87 rulemaking occurs, the bill directs us to also develop individual and general authorizations for projects related to dredge and fill activities in state waters. And so we can scroll down to the next slide, and really happy to share this with you all. You're the first group that we've unveiled this to, but we just recently updated our website because we developed these temporary authorization materials. And so I would encourage you to visit our website. The link here is in the slides, but if you go to CDPHE's website and just search for dredge and fill, you'll find this information related to the temporary authorizations. So we, on that website, provide materials for folks to get a better understanding about what activities temporary authorizations cover, how to apply for a temporary authorization, and what that means for practitioners or project owners and operators. So encourage you to visit that. Great guidance there. And we can go ahead and scroll down to the next slide. The bill directs all of our activities as far as implementation currently. So as I mentioned, what the division did was develop an temporary authorization template that essentially recognizes U.S. Army Corps of Engineers nationwide and regional general permit conditions, and then includes some additional Colorado-specific conditions that make sense for protection of our state waters. In addition to that, we're currently developing a statewide general authorization for discharges of dredge or fill material into isolated waters, including wetlands. And those isolated features are further defined in the House bill. So next we can scroll to the temporary authorization overview, just to give you all a sense of how we are bridging the gap between when the Sackett decision occurred and when we have the final rulemaking for Regulation 87. We are trying to provide some clarity for people and some authorization for folks to move forward with dredge and fill activities in the absence of a permitting program. And how we're doing that is through these temporary authorizations. The temporary authorizations are limited to a 2-year effective date. Again, implemented as an interim solution until Regulation 87 is developed. And these temporary authorizations rely on the core framework for regional and nationwide general permits. And hopefully that provides folks some comfort knowing that there's some consistency between what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has expected over the past several years and what the Water Quality Control Division will expect moving forward. So we can scroll down and I'll talk briefly about some key components of the temporary authorizations. So one thing is, first, if you are a project proponent, owner, or operator of a project that includes a dredge or fill activity, that you must submit a complete application in advance of the project. Again, that material is all on our website. And in these temporary authorizations, as I mentioned earlier, we do include some Colorado-specific requirements. One of those being the granting us the authority to inspect a project if we, if we feel that that is appropriate. And then also for a project owner or operator to design, install, and maintain control measures to avoid and minimize adverse effects to either streams or wetlands. And then we can scroll to the next slide there. These temporary authorizations also include compensatory mitigation requirements if those are applicable to the project. So any project impacts that exceed these thresholds that you see here in the red, which are unavoidable impacts to either wetlands or streams, will require compensatory mitigation. And the compensatory mitigation is intended to address all functions of state waters required or impacted by the dredge or fill activity. Scrolling down a little bit, we can get into some more detail about compensatory mitigation. In the application for any dredge or fill activity that's occurring currently or in the next year or so, if the project requires compensatory mitigation, we are asking the applicant to describe how they will compensate for these unavoidable impacts, whether that be through purchasing credits through a wetland mitigation bank or credits for stream mitigation, depending on the type of your project. And if we determine after receiving your complete application that compensatory mitigation is necessary, we will define that compensatory mitigation requirement in your temporary authorization. And we are, again, relying on historical practices that the Corps has developed, and we'll use the Colorado mitigation procedures as a method to develop debit and credit calculators. And we can scroll down again, kind of expanding on compensatory mitigation for streams here. Again, projects that exceed this loss threshold of 300ths of an acre of impacts to non-WOTUS streams, that we would require the project proponent, owner, or operator to conduct work that effectively results in a net increase in the function of the state waters. And if that's not possible, then project proponents, owners, and operators have the option to purchase mitigation bank credits. And similar for wetlands, if there's an impact greater than 0.1 acre, then we would ask that the project owner or operator purchase mitigation bank credits to compensate for that loss. So that's really covers our temporary authorizations. One thing I'll mention is that our primary role right now is to issue these temporary authorizations. We have a time control goal to issue the temporary authorizations, which within 45 days of receiving a complete application. So we are prepared to do that moving forward. And we do have resources if you have questions or need some additional information. Feel free to visit our website. We do have a dredge and fill protection unit and folks there that can help answer questions. In the meantime, though, the bill also directs the division to develop an isolated state waters general authorization, which we're currently in the process of developing. So we can scroll down to the next slide. This isolated state waters general authorization will be effective for 5 years. And again, similar to our temporary authorization, incorporate best practices for environmental protection. And they exclude certain specific waters from coverage that Annette covered earlier. So we're working on this. The isolated state waters general authorization will be available for public comment once we issue it, and our goal for issuance would be the first quarter of 2025. So that's an update of where we are at with program implementation, and then I will turn it back to Annette to talk more about Regulation 87 development.
Thanks, Kelly. I appreciate that. One thing I'll add to the isolated state waters general permit is that under the requirements of the bill, pre-construction notification is not going to be required. It's just, kind of the self-implementing authorization that if you're doing a project in, under the scope of that particular authorization, you don't need to contact us about that unless you have questions, of course. So I will go into Reg 87 now. This again is going to be the state's control regulation for discharge of dredge and fill material to state waters. The legislation itself establishes kind of different categories of rules that the commission, Water Quality Control Commission, must adopt or may adopt. Rules for the program as a whole. I think the most important thing to point out probably as we're developing this regulation is that the stringency has to be at least the same degree as the current Army Corps regulations or the 404 B1 guidelines. We have interpreted that to mean, there is still flexibility in how we craft these regulations, as long as the protection is still, at least, as strong as what the Corps has historically done. So we're in the process of developing that. The commission has to adopt procedures for the issuance of what we are calling authorizations as opposed to permits. We're going to have general authorizations and individual authorizations. The commission has to adopt a fee structure. guidelines for consultation with other state and federal agencies, and an exemption for certain voluntary stream restoration activities. And then the commission may also clarify the exemptions and exclusions that are in the statute itself, but without, expanding or limiting their scope. They're not allowed to adopt any additional exemptions or exclusions. Those would have to be done through the legislative process. And then for individual authorizations, the commission is directed to adopt requirements for applications, and timelines, public notice, that kind of thing. I think the important thing to note for individual authorizations is we're trying to craft a rule-making proposal that will make this process less onerous. For example, as the slide says, criteria for the alternatives analysis, purpose and need statements, and those kinds of things that have historically been included in the Corps' requirements. We would really like to streamline that process and make it less burdensome for applicants and for us as the reviewing agency. So we're looking for a lot of input from stakeholders on how those requirements should be structured. And then finally, compensatory mitigation rules. We are really starting, from scratch with our compensatory mitigation framework. We want to use the federal framework as kind of our, as guidance, and some of the things that have worked in that framework, but we also want to take this opportunity to craft our own system for hierarchy of how compensatory mitigation is accomplished, and things that work with our with ephemeral and intermittent streams. So we're looking for input from folks who have experience in that realm. Next slide. So this is just a general outline of what the draft looks like. We rolled out this draft at the very beginning of December and presented it, kind of walked through it at our December 4th stakeholder meeting. And this slide just shows the different sections that are included in the reg. Some of it is very detailed because it's, kind of a copy and paste from the statute itself. And those provisions can't really be tinkered with, but there is a lot that still needs to be filled in. So it is definitely an initial draft, but this is the bones of it and the outline of it. Next slide. So on our great new website, this is what it'll look like. You can review a draft of the regulation. And also there's a companion document that are notes that we put together on each of those sections that kind of show where everything came from. This was directed under the statute. This is verbatim from the statute. And also kind of highlights the areas where we're really looking for input. People, of course, can give input on anything they want through our feedback forms that are also on the website. Kelly, can you confirm that the feedback form is that you can access that from the website? Sure. Or do you, okay. You
can.
I'll do that right now. Okay. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well as I talk about stakeholder engagement, but we have just a few more slides to get through, just kind of talking about the process going forward as we continue to craft and refine the regulation. So next slide, kind of scroll down to the schedule. As I mentioned, December 4th, we went through the initial draft. there is a Google feedback form that is very structured and corresponds to each of those different sections of the regulation, that we're asking folks to give feedback with that form. The deadline is coming up very, very quickly for providing that initial feedback. That date's not on this slide, but it's January 13th, this coming Monday. We are going to collate that initial information and assess which topics are most important to folks. And we're going to, arrange those topics over the next 7 months and create agendas for monthly stakeholder meetings going forward, based on people's response and kind of the priorities that people see as being, way up there. And then kind of fast forwarding, we will have monthly meetings, and then we get to July of 2025. That's when we are going to have a proposal for the Water Quality Control Commission. And the proposal is just that. It doesn't mean we can't continue this process, and we intend to continue having stakeholder meetings up until the rulemaking, which isn't until December of 2025. So we'll continue discussions with stakeholders and continue to refine the proposal up until just before the rulemaking. So next slide, please.
And now I'll just interject about your question about the notes. So there are notes on Regulation 87, the draft proposal for Regulation 87, available on our website. And then also linked through this presentation are some additional notes that kind of consolidate our input or our notes on the draft regulation. So encourage you all to either access those through the agenda item or through this presentation.
And Kelly, is there a link to the feedback form on the website? Okay, great. So again, that's for initial feedback that's due on January 13th, but there will be many other opportunities for feedback over the next several months. Next slide, please. We'll just kind of go down. So this just kind of summarizes what I was saying. We are going to have monthly meetings, and we're going to continue them past July, but just from January until July, when we want to have a solid proposal ready for the commission. After each meeting, we'll have a new draft of the regulation, based on whatever the topic of that particular meeting was. We will assign stakeholders homework after each meeting to comment on the latest and greatest draft of the rule. And we'll send email reminders to stakeholders that have signed up, to remind them, the deadlines of submitting their comments and their homework. After, when we get to each meeting, I think the structure is going to be essentially the same. We will, recap what we've heard from stakeholders, and then we'll provide an updated draft and kind of go through our thinking on the updates this is meant to be an iterative process with a lot of stakeholder feedback in between each meeting. So next slide, the next couple of slides, just, again, these are kind of screenshots from our website that give, here you can register to attend our next meeting, which is at the end of January, and all other future meetings are also on there, so you can register for all of them. These are all, 100% virtual meetings, so any and everybody can attend from anywhere. And, again, this also shows the Google form and the feedback that's due by January 13th. And then the next slide again is just, more great information on our website. And I think that's all for me. I'll take questions after Commissioner Buck But I'm going to turn it over to her to just kind of give an overview of the Water Quality Control Commission's rulemaking process for those of you who might not be familiar with it. It's kind of a longer process than a lot of commissions and boards go through. And so I'll hand it over to her and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Annette. And thanks everybody for sticking with us. You can go to the next slide. I'll just do a quick run through. The Water Quality Control Commission is made up of 9 volunteers. We're from across the state. A couple of us have to be here on the West Slope. And folks from ag, from municipal water treatment, a lot of different interests represented on the commission. The folks you just heard from are the staff of the Water Quality Control Division, and they do all the policy work, do all the heavy lifting and the drafting, and then we get to do the final decision making. And that's going to be reflected in the next slide, which I think is the most important one. I actually think of this as a funnel, but this is a pyramid. We start with a lot of pre-hearing statements, and this is the way all of our rulemakings work. We're going to start for this dredge and fill in August. So we're going to get statements from the division who drafted the rule. We have people request party status once they see that. Then we have responsive pre-hearing statements where everybody reacts to that proposed rule. So we're going to probably have a bunch of different stakeholders reacting and giving us responsive pre-hearing statements 2 months before the hearing. And then we have a rebuttal where the division will come back and the other stakeholders will respond to each other. And then we'll hold a pre-hearing conference. It sort of has a very strong court-like feeling to it for me as a lawyer. 3 weeks before, people will do motions, practice, and I'll rule on those motions. And then we'll have a public hearing in early December where, and I think of it as a funnel because as we go through these statements and people go back and forth, the staff is talking to stakeholders and even narrowing the issues further. And because this is such an important rulemaking, they've started doing that. They've started talking to people now, which is why we're here tonight. And then this is the formal part of that. By the time we get to the hearing, hopefully, there'll be a lot of issues worked out, but there might be still a few items of controversy that the commission is going to have to hear testimony and make a decision at the hearing. So I just want to put in another pitch for you guys all to get involved with your ditch company or whoever you know is going to care about dredge and fill. This is a big one. We can go to our next slide. And these are the folks that are going to help you be involved. JoJo is actually a Craig native. I'm calling that out, JoJo. Raised here in Craig, and she is our director administrator and does all the magic to make our hearings happen, as well as Peyton. And so all these links are here. I think you guys have a copy of this link to your agenda, hopefully. If not, we'll send it out afterwards. And you know, Northwest Colorado is such a unique place. We have such unique geology and topography. I hope that you guys track this as much as you can. I know you have a lot on your plates, but we'd love to have your input, see how this will work. This will work for you here in Northwest Colorado. Thank you. And then open it up for any questions, and the experts are probably gonna have all the answers instead of me.
What was the question that you asked about whether we had something or not?
Oh, there's a lot of links in this document. Yeah, do you guys have a link to this document, hopefully?
We have the document, and Sally, let's put it on where we put the guidelines on our homepage. Let's add this to it, so both the rulemaking and that will be on under the same tab.
That's great. Yeah.
Yes, we do have that.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, any questions here in the room or online? There was a lot to digest.
I have a question. This is Jackie.
Yes, Jackie.
Thanks for the presentation, and I'm sorry if I missed it. I've had some parenting things going on, but is there money to hire additional staff in order to work with this program?
Great question, Jackie. We're currently in the process of staffing our dredge and fill protection unit. So right now we have 2 staff on board. Scott Garnkars, some of you might recognize his name. He's with our Water Quality Control Division, and he's been with us for a long period of time. And he's previously had experience with 401 certifications. And then we also have Michaela Snow on board, and she helped initially implement our Clean Water Policy 17. So we're hoping to at least hire 1 more individual, and we're currently in the process of doing that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, I'm wondering if we could maybe get a good example of an activity or I guess a structure that we're trying to protect that's not already being protected at the federal level. I mean, just something kind of anecdotal that we could talk about, help me understand a little bit more. It's better.
Sure. We've received notifications. One of the requirements under the Clean Water Policy 17, which was our interim measure to kind of cover until the legislation was developed, we did receive several notifications. And off the top of my head, I can't think of any that were in your basin, but we did receive notification for projects such as residential or commercial development projects that might have filled a wetland that would no longer be considered WOTUS after Sackett. We've also received notifications for transportation projects. And then lastly, the last kind of like the big scope of the notifications we received were for stream restoration projects. So kind of building on what Bo presented earlier, if there was some type of, stream restoration project in a water that's no longer considered waters of the United States, that would be something that our Water Quality Control Division would address through either our temporary authorization, or if an activity occurs in the future, we will have mechanisms to provide authorization for that type of activity. I hope that helps. If you need further clarification, I'm happy to provide that.
No, that's helpful to kind of speak to that a little bit and kind of isolate maybe what we're looking to protect versus what might be an overlap. So
Sure.
Another thing too is I didn't see provision for, let's say, a rancher that wants to go and develop new cropland like on a river bottom. I know our basin implementation plan kind of is in support of opening up new meadows and stuff, particularly in the river valley. But I didn't see anything, provision for that or an exemption for that for somebody that wants to maybe do some grading or some cultivation, not necessarily related to a ditch, but probably in someone might consider it a sensitive area. Do we anticipate there's going to be any exemptions for something like that?
Well, I'll answer it generally, and then Kelly, if you have anything more specific, as I mentioned, the exemptions and exclusions are all in the statute itself, and the commission is not allowed to adopt new ones. So if you mentioned, kind of sensitive areas, if it's upland, certainly, those activities would not be covered. Upland, dry land. But if it's a wetland or, an ephemeral stream or something else that's considered a state water, then it would likely be covered under our program, just as it has been historically under the CORS program. And so is that helpful at all?
I think so. I think the differentiation is between an upland versus somebody that wants to like open up some new cropland down on the river bottom, you know, and just thinking about that.
Sure. I just to build on what Annette mentioned is that even if an activity was excluded or water feature was exempted, that doesn't mean that the project could move forward. And that's one of the reasons why we developed these temporary authorizations as kind of an interim measure. And then moving forward, we will have availability for general authorization or individual authorizations for projects that might impact the stream or a wetland. So it doesn't, if the feature isn't excluded or if the activity isn't exempted, that doesn't mean you're precluded from moving forward with your project. You would just have to receive an authorization through our division for doing so. Doug?
So thank you, ladies, for coming, making your presentation. So, hey, I was opposed to this concept. There was no gap. The 404 permit was working. We have it. And again, so then we come in with this thing and now and the waters of Colorado. So, and again, so it's not going to affect me. I'm a rancher, I'm doing my thing and it's probably not, but it's kind of like an overreach. It's overstepping. And, and I just worry about, how much more, is it really about control or is it about, water qualities of the United States? So again, myself and the River District, we came out and, not opposed on this bill when it was a bill, and you gals are doing a great job implementing it. But you need to hear from us that, this is not a problem. I don't believe it's a problem. So I just wonder where we're heading here. It's a control structure is what it is. It's control. It's not water quality, it's control. Thank you.
All right, any other questions here in the room or online? Okay.
Thanks, Jennifer, for making the trip.
Yeah,
Thank you, guys.
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you very much.
Have a good
If you have any
evening.
questions, reach out, please.
Okay, we will. Thanks, Annette. Thanks, Kelly.
Bye.
All right. Rebecca.
Yeah. I can share my screen. Okay, I'm just giving a quick River District update. Thanks for giving me a few minutes on the agenda. First off, we have our first board meeting of the calendar year coming up in a couple weeks here. You can register for Zoom or in person to attend that and listen in. It's about a day and a half. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. But we also will have a board packet up probably next week. So if you're interested in hearing or looking at our agenda and what we're going to be discussing, that will be up. One of the things that we always talk about is a hydrology update in detail. So if you're interested in hearing that, that will be on the agenda. We also have,
Do you have a location yet?
oh, it's always at our office. Our board meeting is at our office in Glenwood.
Which, okay.
Yeah.
I thought they were fine.
Yeah, but Zoom is good too. If you, don't wanna go all the way to Glenwood, which this time of year can be rough. Also with the legislative session starting, we follow that pretty closely and have someone who's down at the Capitol every week monitoring water bills. for the western slope. And so, if you're interested in hearing what's going on and hearing, the updates that we give to our board on a bi-weekly basis, you can tune into those meetings. Just email Stephanie Moore, her address is, on that slide, and I'll upload or give these slides to Steve to put in the folder. And you can tune into those legislative updates. We do vote to either approve or, recommend modification to water bills that are going through. And so, and do ask for public comment as well. So you can always join in the discussion. On the community funding partnership grants piece, we are still, really looking for a lot of Yampa and White and Green Basin grant applications. Always looking for those. We do, the River District staff is recommending to the board funding for the Upper Yampa Watershed Model Project, which is a project in the Stagecoach Reservoir to look at nutrient movement and the watershed and the reservoir level. So that's going to be at our board meeting for recommendation. And then there's also another recommendation for funding for airborne snow observatory flights in the Western Slope River District basins. A couple just kind of notable things that happened at the US federal legislative level. It was really exciting just before the end of the year, the Upper Colorado and San Juan Rivers Endangered Fish Recovery Program was reauthorized. Just kind of one of those big things that, on a day-to-day, you never really think about, but it is there so that our lives are easier, because it means that water projects do not have to do their own mitigation for Endangered Species Act compliance for the 4 endangered fish species. It's all covered by the recovery program. Really big benefit for the Western Slope and the whole state. That authorization was expiring and they reauthorized it, just big lift, and even funded it, which was also great to keep that program going. So that was exciting. And there was also a different bill to address invasive mussels. You guys have probably heard that the Colorado is having zebra mussel issues. Hopefully they don't come up here, but there was that bill that went through as well. And then Amy already talked about SCTP not going through that through Congress.
So Rebecca, was
Yeah.
the invasive mussels, that bill going through this year, or did it go?
Yes, it
through?
already passed.
It already passed.
Yeah, it passed. They just closed out the last session. It passed in that session.
Okay.
One other small thing, we're plugging, Growing Water Smart. This is a opportunity for, water leaders, land use planners, public works people, to go to this, 3-day workshop and, talk about sustainable water supply and sustainable water use. It's free to attend and they pay for your lodging, I believe, and they end up giving you like a $10,000 grant for your community to implement a project.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know a ton about it details wise, but we're looking at, we're promoting it. There's been like the city of Steamboat has already participated, I believe, in this area, and then other cities and towns around our district. And so we're putting it out there. It's going to happen in April in Montrose. So I know like Rangeley hasn't done it, Meeker hasn't done it. There's other places that could participate if they were interested in. So
Are you working with CML or CCI to make sure you got a thorough contact list?
no, that's a good idea. I'll
Also,
suggest that,
Also QQ, Northwest Colorado Council of Governments, Water Quality Funding, might be another one to connect with.
Yeah, Tori's pretty involved with this program.
Great.
So, yeah. Perfect.
The cogs are always.
The cogs are always good to walk them, yeah. Yeah, I know we've heard a lot of really good things from people coming out of this.
Well,
So, yeah.
Craig,
No, I don't believe. I'll have to look. They're not on our list of like should be, so they might have already. That's it. Thanks, guys.
Okay, anybody have questions for Rebecca? Okay, seeing none. Jackie, are you still on?
Yep.
Okay.
So I don't have our agenda packet out yet for the CWCB board meeting. That's still the last week of January, so we don't get that until about 10 days before. And I think Jeff did a great job covering budget stuff, and Amy covered where the state is on ongoing negotiations. So the only thing I would just put a plug in is that the ISF, the in-stream flow recommendations, have come out for 2025. And if you're paying attention to Northwest Colorado's recommendations, those two, Milk Creek and Vermilion, will not be before the board until the March meeting. So they won't be heard in January, as far as I understand it. So I just wanted to note that is of impact to some of you producers in the basin. And that's really all I have right now. I look forward to giving you an update after my last board meeting in January. And yeah, looking forward also to passing the torch to whoever comes next. So thanks.
All right, thanks, Jackie. Any questions for Jackie?
Online? Okay, hearing none.
Next item on our agenda is Big River Committee IBCC. So Jeff or
Okay, so we're gonna go at this. Sal, can you just bring the Big River Committee PowerPoint back? Rebecca's gonna start. We're gonna talk about the hydrology update first. Ken's gonna give us an overview of IBCC. And I'm gonna kind of try to backfill a little of that discussion on the Bureau's NEPA process. So the goal of the hydrology update, Rebecca, go ahead. Are you all fired up?
I'm ready.
So remember that we started talking about this a couple of meetings ago. Last meeting, we gave an update that was basically put together by me. It had some holes in it. The goal of this is not to go into detailed analysis on any aspect of hydrology in the basin, but just to give the roundtable an overview. So how's it going? Is hydrology better in the basin? Is it getting worse? And if there's ever any dramatic thing that we need to drill down into, we will. But that's not the first objective. The primary objective is just saying, how's it going? And so Rebecca's got 3 or 4 slides to kind of get that.
Yep, okay. Sorry, Nick.
I think you have to do it. Somebody's got to say decline or allow.
I thought I could do it from over there.
You have a lot of power, Kristen. You're a powerful woman. Okay.
Okay, well, this is just a few slides to kind of give us a real quick snapshot of hydrology. As I mentioned, if you want the deep dive, tune into our board meeting in a few weeks and you'll get the real technical expert, which is not me. This is showing just the snow water equivalent across the western part of Colorado. Yampa White, Little Snake sitting at 94%, little bit below average there. This is average is based on the past 30 years. So not too bad, doing better than some of those lower southwest Colorado basins. We started off the year pretty good in November and then have kind of flatlined. I should mention too that we're kind of seeing a La Nina situation, which means that a lot of that snow goes north and hits like Idaho and Wyoming and Colorado's kind of average or below average, so that's just kind of the place we're in right now. Next slide is showing our reservoir storage across, you know, the whole kind of upper Colorado River Basin. We're pretty much sitting at right around average for most reservoirs. Flaming Gorge doing a little bit better, but, you know, as we all know, Lake Powell and Lake Mead are, you know, in those 30% full, which is not where we really want to see them. And Blue Mesa is at 63%. When we're looking at the Lake Powell Reservoir, we're really not too different from where we were last year at this time. Inflow is really about the same, and forecasts for inflow are essentially where the forecast is 92% inflow for the spring runoff this year. So 92% of average, sorry to specify that. So looking at average or a little bit below average. And outflow, same story. It's just pretty much where we were last year here. They will make the final determination in April as to how much water is released from Lake Powell. Last I heard, that was 9 million acre feet, I think, but the final determination is in April, and that's based off of how much is in both Lake Powell and Lake Mead. And right now we're kind of at like a point where it's a small change in the forecast could mean a big change in release, because we're kind of sitting right at that tier where we're in between those two levels. So there's a lot of unknown right now with that. And then this is just kind of that last piece to show the 24-month forecast. And as I mentioned, really nothing is going to change that is anticipated in the next year. A year from now, it's very likely that Lake Powell is at the same level or even slightly less level as at where we are now, based on what they're forecasting. So obviously that can change, but most likely no change in the next year. That's all I have. All those links to where to get this is also included. So feel free to check it out yourself if you're as nerdy as I am.
Okay, Ken. Well, everybody we have 3 IDCC meetings a year. Jeff and I are your 2 representatives. Thank you. C9 is one of those 3 meetings. So thank you to all of you that had a chance to go down to the C9 summit. That was a big success. We had, I think, 260 people that showed up. It was an all-day meeting. Well, actually, it was a day and a half. It probably will end up being closer to 2 full days next this fall. There's just still plenty of the content was much better, but it was at times really rushed. Our breakout sessions in particular were really, a little short, but it was I think everybody enjoyed going and so then I've been told that one of the priorities that came out of, it was kind of the consensus priority from the IBCC representatives, that measurement of snowpack, soil moisture, but measurement and gathering of data is our highest priority. And so that has become a high priority for DNR as part of the projects bill and the money that they're going to look for in this legislative session. Just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. So we are having some direct impact on using your voice and carrying it forward to the state. The No and Low Regrets 2.0 has been morphed into a drought resiliency action plan. So DRAP will be the kind of acronym for the efforts that we're going to be making here in the future. Not too much different from what we've been discussing, a bucket of or basket full of different options for the basins to choose and work on and share what they've learned with the Colorado Water Conservation Board staff and board itself. We're really thankful to the staff for the increased level of support for the IBCC. We used to have 2-hour meetings, now we have full day meetings. In fact, we usually meet the night before for, you know, a chance to get to know each other a little better and talk about water, what else would you do? And then, they are talking about, well, our next meeting will be the 26th of February. There are some interesting ideas being kicked around. I don't think, you know, now that Russ is gone and Kat's taking over, Catherine Weissmiller was the interim director, but has been the assistant director for the planning section. So she is interested in some ideas that like it could be an executive committee. The executive committee would assist in preparation of these meetings, and not often, so we want to make sure we take care of planning in conjunction with the members, not just from staff driven. So that's an interesting concept. We'll see if that goes anywhere. And there's also another one of a number of ideas was that to actually have a small segment available to the roundtables on the Colorado Water Conservation Board agenda to give some updates and reports and feedback from what the work that we're doing. So clearly, the Colorado Water Conservation Board sees much more value in the roundtables and their participation in some of this big picture stuff. And I think we thank Jeff and the Big River Committee and others for, you know, saying, well, no, we actually do have an opinion and ideas, and we want to continue discussing these things. So thanks, Jeff, and the rest of everybody else on there.
That's good. Okay.
That's all I have.
Excellent. So, for this next part, we're gonna talk just real quickly about that process. But before we do, there was the Colorado River Water Users Association meeting in Las Vegas. May have read about it, may have heard about some things about it. It was really described as kind of tense. There was a lot of tension between the upper basin and lower basin. There's some signs that indicate that the family isn't working very well. We can talk more about that, but let's don't, because it's getting late. The one thing I do want to mention about this is Rebecca made a very insightful comment. She attended for the first time. Amy was there, Rebecca was there. Could you just recap that comment you made about the messaging? Because I think it's kind of important for us to hear.
Yeah, I think I just came away with the realization of how important messaging is and how difficult it is, and what a huge monumental task that Amy O and Commissioner Mitchell have to really overcome, because it's really easy for the lower basin to say, well, we just want everyone to conserve. We're conserving, we just want the upper basin to conserve. And it's way harder to say as the upper basin, well, that's misleading. That's not the whole story. We have hydraulic shortages every year. And there's a lot more pieces to that, but I think that's the piece that the lower basin really tried to hammer home, was like, we're just asking for fairness. And that looks really good on paper, and it looks really good if you're sitting in, you know, like West Virginia reading this article and say, yeah, of course. But if you live in Colorado, you know other realities. So they have a really hard job to describe what's really going on. And so kudos to them for all the work they do.
That's it in a nutshell. A very good point. Okay, go on down one slide, Sally. So, a few weeks ago, I can't remember the exact date, the Bureau released this document, which is a narrative describing 5 alternatives that they are going to analyze as a part of the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, process going forward. It leads to an environmental impact statement, right? And they put together 5 proposals, or put forward 5 proposals. None of those map very well to either the lower division's original proposal from this summer or the upper basin. So Amy already reminded us of what those were, so we don't need to talk more about that. But Sal, if you just go down one more. The alternatives that they described have some common concepts in them. They're distinct, and I just want to touch on 2 of them, and then I'm just going to close that up. So 3 more minutes. So the first alternative, go ahead, one more, Sally. The first alternative is the no action alternative, and if you remember from the summer when we analyzed the supplemental environmental impact statement, if you're going through a NEPA process, you always have to have no action. What happens if we do nothing? Right in their document, they state that this does not meet purpose and need. So everyone understands that we have to do something. But when I talked about this with Amy the very first time, I said, so this is basically a non-starter. She said, no, wait. Because if you think about it, it's not that hard to imagine circumstances wherein we could be left saddled with the no action alternative, right? Bureau puts forward their final alternative. They say, this is what we want to do. Somebody doesn't like it. Probably that's not us. Probably that's our neighbors down below. They sue to stop the process. And what is left? What's left is the way we're doing it now. It's, as Ken was trying to get us to understand, it's not exactly the 2007 guidelines. What the fallback position would be is the record of decision that they went through the crisis years, right? And that provides for basically 8.23 million acre feet of release from our reservoir and 600,000 acre feet of conservation in the lower basin. But it's not, is that great? No. Will it fix the problem? No, but it's not unthinkable that we could be left with that. Okay, now the next proposal is, all of these have names which are designed to make you think about or to understand them. This thing is called the federal authorities. The main thing I want to highlight about this with you is this is kind of the big stick alternative. What the feds are saying in this alternative is, we don't need you to do anything. You don't have to agree.
Yeah.
Lower basin doesn't have to agree with upper basin. We have statutory authority to implement this. We don't need any more stakeholder feedback. If you can't get it together, this may be what we do. It's got a release curve, as sort of described by Amy. So from 5.0 at the low end to 9.5 million acre feet. It's based on Powell elevations and quote some CRISPA contributions. So some contributions from upstream reservoirs. So those are just the two. You could quickly scroll through the remaining three.
This would be fair to say that this alternative two may be the least objectionable of the alternatives.
It maps the most closely to the original upper basin proposal. And as Amy described for you in her talk, with the refinements that they put in, like mapping closer to the curve and defining some parallel activities, it actually comes pretty close. Our proposal comes pretty close to this. So that Ken's right, that would be the best. So the hybrid authority thing, it's similar, except it would require some new mechanics. The next one is called cooperative conservation. This, if you read the objective of this thing, it's the longest string of buzzwords you can imagine. When you get to the end, you just want to get out your guitar and start singing Kumbaya. But it has a release curve based on total system storage, not just Powell and Mead, and there's some other details. But there would be new regulations, new law required to implement it. And then the last one is an even more creative one called basin hybrid. Same release curve that Amy was talking about, but there's a little ambiguity there. It says primarily based on Powell elevation. And there's some new incentives and things that are sort of not very well defined. But both those last two do include contributions and conservation from upper basin. So that means if either of those got implemented, they would be asking us to conserve. Okay, so here's my last comment, and it's late. I don't know if you can remember last year, but we had gotten information about the supplemental environmental impact statement. Remember that? They had some fairly serious alternatives requiring shortages in the lower basin. We analyzed that. Amy worked hard on and her team on analyzing that thing. We wrote a letter of support, right? And then what happened? The lower division turned in a proposal, and the Bureau pulled the SEIS back and then effectively adopted the lower division's proposal. Remember that? Okay, and that became the federal record of decision. Now, what happens, a few weeks ago, they put out this thing, Jeff gets all excited, oh, here's the real NEPA alternatives. I start talking to people, putting together this presentation. 3 weeks later, during the Christmas holiday, they call up Amy and say, you know, we would entertain some modifications to your proposal, some refinement to the original upper division proposal. Basically, what I'm telling you is, we really don't know where the Bureau is headed. So this provides sort of a backdrop, it provides context for some of their thinking. I would be shocked if any of these alternatives that I've just outlined for you are the real thing that goes forward. I just don't think it's going to be like that. So that's my parting shot. Remember that by August of 2026, new operating guidelines are supposed to be in place. The original deadline for feedback on this and finalization of alternatives was July of this year. That's an original date. It probably has no standing anymore. So now that you're completely in the know, any questions at all, Thomas?
I was gonna say, give Rebecca a little help here. It's not just papers in West Virginia. There was a story in the Colorado Sun in November caused quite the stir, trying to say Colorado's just full of crap and not give California the water. And so it's not just a West Virginia newspaper, Colorado Sun in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
In this story.
And I think it was Virginia actually that had that study that, I couldn't remember the state,
Right.
that study.
That showed that if we didn't have.
Wasn't West Virginia, sorry guys.
Right, if we didn't have free water conditions, free river conditions. Yeah, but no, you're right, Thomas, they're absolutely right. I mean, the lower division has done such a good job of getting the public's attention, right? They've been on 60 Minutes, they had the Newsweek article, they're on PBS, they're on NPR. They are working on the messaging, and that's where we've got to dig in and get our story out there. Okay.
All right. Cameron Sally, go home.
Right? Well, we're a little over and we saved best for last, as always, Peppo. So I'll try and do a quick recap of our meeting. Going over our financials really quick. We're starting over with 2 new grants, starting in November. We've got the WSRF grant is a 3-year grant. It's $68,000 to $68,250. And it's a 3-year grant. We're given 5 years to spend it. We had about $5,000 left over after this grant. So they're recognizing that and saying you have some extra time afterwards if you don't spend it within those 3 years. We're also starting over with a new $25,000 Peppo grant. Annual 1-year grant. And that's for Peppo administration, advertisements, recorder services, story map development. So basically we're starting at 0 and we have fresh funds for the year. One of our big tasks now is the story map. So we have talked about it and we are gonna have a subcommittee, a story map subcommittee. And we've started compiling some names and we're looking for more names to help with populating the story map, pictures, you know, technical expertise. We'll have a meeting probably once a month, and like it'll depend, but we do need some participation. It's been really low in Peppo and the story map is going to be a big project. So we're looking for more people. You don't have to be part of the roundtable to be a member of the subcommittee. You just have to be willing. So if there's any people that want to help out
please let us know. We're definitely looking for help. So we're gonna, send out, there's a request for proposal, that we would like to, that I'm gonna send out again to the PEPO committee, and we are gonna, vote on that and, hopefully have some, that'll be on this, the 20th of February. We hope to have proposals due from contractors in the 15th of March. And hope to start phase 2 of the story map, April 15th. So April 15th to beginning of, the end of December is when we're gonna be building the story map. So that's the time when we really need a lot of participation. So it's a pretty tight timeline also for the story map to turn around. So please help us. Anything else we should talk about for trying to get participation had?
Well, the main thing that we want to emphasize is that when you read the original Enabling Act 1177, the only 2 committees that are actually named specifically in that act is the Interbasin Combat Committee and PEPO. And we still have weak representation here. Now, the grants committee is up to probably what, 8 or 9 people? Yeah, I mean, we've got really great people on grants, no problem getting people to the Big River Committee, but we could use some additional participation at PEPO. So if you're a roundtable member, you know, it would be a good idea for you to identify one of these subcommittees, and maybe it's PEPO, that you want to support. That you think that that's a place that you could put a little bit of your personal time and energy, or at least show up at the meeting another hour early, and you'll be all ready and hungry for dinner. So.
Okay. Let's see, we already went over the upcoming events. We do have some newspaper articles. We have 4 that have been scheduled. So, we probably have the first 2, picked out. We're gonna talk about upcoming projects and possibly return flows. So we have some coming up in August and October, so keep thinking about good article.
Yeah, we haven't, we talked about it, maybe having somebody from the White River, talk about not just the return flow study, but what else is new and exciting in the White River.
And on that idea, we're also talking about field trips and maybe doing, field trips in the White River, having, our meetings in Meeker or something like that, or somewhere else, or in Steamboat, and going to, visit the Walton Creek project, something like that. So we're looking to maybe, take our field trips to the White River for some big projects. Anybody has any ideas? We could do the roundtable meetings remotely. Find a place. So, field trips,
Yeah, instead of doing all 6 meetings here in Craig, maybe have one in the White River and one upstream, and they have an associated tour, like the one that we did in July last year. It was out the Maybell Ditch, and then here at the Craig River Park.
yeah, and I think we'll try and focus it again on our July meeting, doing something like that, another field trip with the roundtable meeting afterwards. That worked out well. Let's see, as far as state messaging, we haven't heard a lot. We're still waiting, so that's kind of in the queue. We'll let you know when we hear anything. And as far as partner updates, we don't have a whole lot. We Sustainability Council. We have hired Jayla Poppleton as our Resilient Water and Watersheds Director, and she was formerly with Water Education Colorado as the Executive Director. So she'll be starting January 15th remotely, and then she'll be moving here to Steamboat in June. So we'll have Jayla, and we're pretty excited about that. Tim's still staying on. He's going to be the Senior Director of Climate Resilience. And scaled down role on some of his more favorite projects, so he'll still be around to help us out. And part of the roundtable, but
He'll be with an emphasis on the headwaters of the Colorado
Yeah.
project.
I think we can, we'll be lucky to have Jayla maybe as part of the roundtable and hopefully Pablo also. That's about it for our partner updates. Anybody has any topics they want to talk about or any questions? Jonathan?
Sally, I just want to say that this summer, well, this spring, we're gonna start working on 3 diversion structure rehabilitations with stream restoration work, and it's with funding from both the River District and CWCD.
Yeah.
So that would just to offer, if we want to do a field trip up there. They're in Colorado on the Little Snake, and they're really easy to access from the road. At least 2 of them are. So it would be an easy place for everyone to be able to see that work, and
Bank restorations? Bank restoration?
there'll be bank restoration, diversion structures, and some of those kind of flow control structures too.
Did we do a hybrid meeting? We did, didn't we?
I think that you all did the tour with the HOC.
Yeah, in August. I think we had a hybrid meeting there also. So we might. even
Yeah, we
be able
zoomed it
to,
from there.
Roundtable meeting up there. We definitely have plenty of stuff to go see.
And that could be, you know, we could have ordered at the conservation district, there's enough room for roundtable members. There is, just if people were interested.
Thanks, Ryan. That's a good idea.
Trying to add a little bit of variety.
See some of the diversity out there. Any other questions?
Anybody online have anything? Seeing none. Thanks, Sally. So our next meeting is March 12th, be here in this room, room 185 at CNCC. And I take a motion to adjourn.
Runner moves.
Do I have a second?
Myers.
Brenner, motion, Myers, second. All in favor of adjourning the meeting, please say aye.
Bye.
Hi.
All right, thanks everybody for sticking it out.
You missed great food.
And Sally, I would like the record to show that I'm 25 minutes, so I'm. But I only used 12.
You're
so
such a
it's
gentleman.
good to get on it. You know.
So rather than give his team, he takes 25 every time, we should give him 25, and then, yeah. And then, he can do the 10.
Oh, no, that's an interesting strategy. Let's do that one second.
So it's probably some of the.
I think it's pretty safe to say that the implementation guidelines.
Probably a lot of.
But you're supposed to be setting the exam.
I see. And then I.